Welcome to the Embodied Educator podcast, where we explore the deep connection between body and mind in education. I'm your host, Liz Wientjes, and each episode we dive into how our physical presence shapes the way we learn, teach, and grow. I'll be talking with education experts from around the world, sharing their insights on embodiment in the classroom. Whether you're an educator or a lifelong learner, you'll find practical tools to explore and apply. Join me as we uncover ways to bring embodied teaching to life. Let's reshape education, one breath at a time. Hello there, embodied educators. Wow, I had to tame my inner perfectionist to avoid overloading you with all the amazing achievements of my multi-passionate, spectacular tentacular guest and embodied expert and educator, Dr. Syng Tan, with a PFHEA, which stands for a Principal Fellowship of Advanced Higher Education. Kai, thank you so much for all the online help desk on how to pronounce your name correctly and address your title. I'll get back to you in a sec, so I'll keep on bragging a little bit. Inspired by the pine nutshell mix on your website, I'll introduce Dr. Syng Tan, an award-winning artist, academic, and agitator known for her eclectic style and cheeky attitude. Kai's current research, reimagining leadership as a decolonial, co-creative, neuroqueer practice centering anti-oppression and futurity, draws on a background as a neurodivergent migrant from a working class upbringing. At the Embodied Education conference in Denmark, where we met, I was caught by her laser-sharp questions, restless tentacles, and tentacular pedagogy speech about an embodied strategy to transform higher education culture. Meet Chimera, an octopussy infused by ancient wisdom who reconnects body with mind, soil with soul, senses common with the cosmic. And she's a true change maker as Yamagata International Documentary Film Festival juror, as a trustee for CHEAT, as a trustee for a charity for detained asylum seekers, leading to the appointment of its first Black neurodivergent female artistic director. Kai is also a curator and creative director, including a Black History Month celebration that reached 18.2 million worldwide, and the opening of a closing ceremony of Asia's Paralympics praised as game-changing by disability groups. Add to the list, which is long, transdisciplinary innovator with her playful practicality, her artful agitation, tentacular teaching, and no-nonsense neurodiverse knowledge of radical research. Kai researches far out into the world, blending many, many fields. Arts, education, politics, neurodiversity, and embodiment, and the list is long. And all of this work, she still finds the time to create and to write as a creative theorist. Kai recently released her first, like she says, serious book for dreamers, doers, and daredevils. And this is the first in a line of 3 redefining leadership. We'll dive into that one. By now, you must realize that this tentacular educator is quite spectacular, but also a mentor, a teacher, and an academic developer. She's been awarded a principal fellowship, taught in 200 universities worldwide, regularly delivers masterclasses and CPDs, such as for Royal Society of Arts, and 870 counting brain and mind experts from 17 countries at the 14th International Conference of ADHD in Berlin. Wondering how that went from an embodied perspective. So, not to forget, Kai is also an associate professor in arts and cultural leadership at the University of Southampton in the UK. Well, that's it for bragging, Kai. Thank you so much for making the time, and welcome to the Embodied Educator podcast.
No, thank you for having me. And that was a big introduction. And I'm sorry that you had to read through all of that.
I went through all the nuts and I was like, okay, this one will fill it. And now I'm realizing, oh, that's already a mouthful. But
yeah, it is a big mouthful. But thank you. And thank you for going through that. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So the first question I ask everyone, which is, who is your biggest profound, inspirational, or maybe just of impactful in good or bad ways, teacher in your in the place where you're at right now, who do you look at as an inspirational teacher?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been very lucky to have been inspired by many
Mm,
teachers throughout my
mm,
life, and people who kind of noticed that I was a little bit different, and then instead of kind of making that difference a negative thing, make that a good thing.
mm,
And throughout my whole life, from a primary school to my secondary school, there were people who kind of, yeah, I really kind of really I have a lot of respect for, because they were themselves a little bit
yeah.
unconventional. So that's been really amazing. But to address your question, I do want to point out a teacher that I haven't met before,
Oh.
and I hope that's okay. And it's a teacher that was alive, who was alive 2,500 years ago, and so
Ooh.
I haven't met. And that is a Chinese
Yeah.
philosopher, and his name is Lao Tzu,
Mm.
and that is that some Lao Tzu is often credited as a philosopher, but also credited as a kind of a mythological figure. So
Yeah.
maybe no one has ever met him before. Maybe it's kind of a myth. But I do want to point him out, because because he was really interesting in that he was someone who kind of not just share his knowledge, but also show us what knowledge can be, and also show us through the body. So Lao Tzu essentially was someone, according to the different interpretations out there, and I think he's a great teacher also because he was initially someone working for the Chinese government 2,500 years ago, someone in the courts. Work, so in today's kind of language, we think of him as someone who's a civil servant,
Mhm.
someone working for an existing kind of
Yeah.
government. But he got really disillusioned because the government was corrupt, but that might sound familiar for many of us in different parts of the world today. But he didn't quite agree with what they were doing, so he actually left. He left his
Yeah.
role, and then he started to travel around the world. And
Ah.
so he became a little bit like a vagrant. He was kind of, just walking everywhere, traveling around the world with his donkey, which is really nice as
Yeah.
well. The donkey as his sidekick. And while he was traveling around the world, he was kind of thinking about the world, and he came up with this kind of little book of poetry, which is a very short book, and I think it's about 500 characters. It's a very very short book, but it shares his teachings of the world. But they are really
Yeah.
valuable, and people in the Western world might be familiar with some of the interpretations, such as Winnie the Pooh coming up with the bear
Yeah.
character, coming up with teaching about the Tao, the
Yeah. Yeah.
Tao,
Yeah.
Tao. And, yeah. So Lao Tzu is the founder of
Yeah.
Taoism, or
Yeah.
Taoism. And so he would teach us things about how knowledge is not just about
Yeah.
knowledge in the brain or the mind, but it's actually about the body as
Yeah.
well. So it's about the belly, it's about feelings and so on. And in fact, he was very anti-intellectual.
I have
And
goosebumps while you say that. You know that? It's just, it's,
yeah, yeah. And he wasn't just talking about it, he was kind of showing it, because he was on the road, he was traveling, and he was learning things, and he
mm,
was, learning from nature as
yeah.
well. So that's why, for me, Lao Tzu is such a great
Yeah.
teacher, because a lot of what he's saying
Yeah.
today rings so true for so many educators, for so many teachers, so many researchers, scholars out there trying to
Yeah.
find connections with the
Yeah.
body and trying to find connections with
Yeah.
nature. And someone back in the day, a long time ago, had already kind of cracked it. And I just thought, oh,
Exactly.
that's a I think that's why I wanted to kind of
Point.
share with your listeners today, very very
Yeah.
quickly, about this really amazing
Oh, that's so
teacher.
cool. And it's actually also, for some reason, making me think of it's actually not that new. So we're not inventing. It's just also, it's been done before. And it's so natural to embrace our, oh, you froze for a sec. Okay. Yeah. To embrace our full body wisdom. And it's not that woo woo, because sometimes listeners think like, oh, but that's so, up in the air. But actually, it's not, you know?
Well, that's the thing, and in Western philosophy as well, like Aristotle, they would be, the whole idea of philosophy was about walking and talking and
Yeah.
thinking. So it isn't just, and of course, I wanted to flag it out right from the beginning. A reference from China, from non-Western culture, because that's also part of my work in terms of trying to decolonize and trying to show that knowledge isn't just a certain kind of
Hmm.
knowledge, not just
Hmm.
Western, and not just in terms of sitting down and thinking, but in terms of something that's non-Western as well, and also something that's using the
Yeah.
body. And in Greek philosophy, you already had that
Yeah.
also thousands of
Yeah.
years ago
Yeah.
as well, that the fact that you need to walk and then
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
talk.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, so I'm holding two thoughts in my mind. Bear with me. So, like, are we going towards the running already in your PhD because I feel like a link there with the walk, or are we going for your book? I'm making it into a question because I feel like I want to involve you in where we go from here.
No, and it's good. I like that thinking out loud. That's kind of what I do
Yeah, right. That's
anyway.
awesome.
I just kind of, yeah, and I don't often know what I'm going to say.
No.
So yeah, so forgive me if there's a lot of kind of rambling and rubbish. But yeah, we could talk about the running bit
Yeah.
maybe.
I feel that's
So
also
yeah,
like linking towards that movement. If you create a
absolutely.
rhythmic movement and flow, that there's more creation of body wisdom and different processes going on, which is very interesting because in the world where we um, are in, I'm referring. I've been growing up in a Western educational system, and that's also a little bit my framework, I guess, where I'm coming from towards this podcast and talking to educators. But I think it's been
Mm.
widespread more and more that we tend to put our students, our children, our listeners in a quite a static setting. Now, your PhD was on, and you created a whole like movement around it on run, run, run. And so you researched the relationship between running and this movement of running and even being sweaty, which we're going to talk about, and then our embodiment and what does it do? Could you take us through how those relate in like thinking and running?
Yeah, so my PhD, which was a long time ago now, like 10 years ago, I
Lucky
think.
you.
Um, yeah, I looked into running and
Yeah.
thinking, and for my actual PhD exams, I took the examiners out for a run as well. So I just made them really
That
sweaty.
is so cool. Did you have
Yeah,
to beg
that
them?
was
Did
what's
you have
that?
to beg them to run?
Oh no, no, they were no, no, I didn't have to beg them. I was like, "Come on, you can do it." And well, that's also that, and that turned out quite well, and that's part of it. I mean, we all, most of us can run. It's something that many of us who, when we were children, we as soon as we can walk, we started
Yeah.
running. And it's only parents and teachers who say, "Oh, stop running," walk, you have to stop running. And so that got me really interested into looking into running. I mean, there's a very established kind of discussion about
Mhm.
walking and the importance of walking as something very
Yeah.
thoughtful, and that's really important
Yeah.
too. And I mentioned earlier the link with Greek philosophy, this idea of walking and talking and
Yeah.
thinking, which is great. And then for me, I was like, yeah, what about, let's take it a little bit
Yeah.
further. What if we increase the speed? What
Yeah.
happens? And so that was part of the kind of premise of my PhD research. I started to look into what neuroscience is saying, what sports science is saying, but also look at the history of running from a cultural perspective. So kind of pull these different things together and look into how, when you increase your
Mhm.
speed, you actually have a kind of a hormone that is
Mhm.
working, and it's very similar. And if you do running, if you increase the speed and you do it for quite a long time, it actually is a pain killing hormone. So it's like cannabis, and
Mm.
that's why it's called endocannabinoid. And and that's a pain killing hormone that helps us to keep
Yeah.
going. And this is, and I mentioned neuroscience, but actually this has been in functioning for human beings more than 2 million years ago, when humans were starting to go hunting, and there were no weapons in when we started hunting. And how do you get the food? You have to keep following an animal, and you follow the animal by kind of slowly running, and you keep following them. And the great thing about the human body is that we can sweat. So, and this is back in the day where the earliest humans were in Africa, trying to look for food, and then they spot, say, an antelope, and they're trying to go after the antelope, and then they have to keep following the antelope. And yes, antelopes have speed, they're very fast at running, but humans can sweat, and we can lose heat by through sweating, and we can keep following the antelopes, and that's how we keep following them, and then they get so tired that they die. And then because of they're losing that they they are not able to lose the heat, so humans
Ah.
would keep following animals for 6 7 hours.
And because we
And
sweat, we empower
yeah,
ourselves to keep
we are
on
able to
going.
keep running
Ah,
after the animal
yeah.
slowly, and then the animal dies, and then
Hmm.
the other miraculous thing is that humans, the hunters, would then have to bring the animal
Yeah,
home,
because they
right?
run them.
Yeah, and then because and then you have to also remember how to get
Yeah,
back to your
yeah.
family. So like when I was doing my research, this sort of story was just fascinating because
How does
it
it
tells us.
relate to like studying or working or like the field we're in now? Because you did the research in, well, recent days, right? Like 10 years ago, but still.
Yes.
And what does it did it bring you in the world of academic?
No, absolutely. It tells us that, it's about that kind of how the body and the mind link together, and
Hmm.
how that's linked to memory, that's linked to a whole set of
Hmm.
skills, whole set of kind of skills and knowledges. And that's so the hunters, they would be able to go
Hmm.
home, and that requires them to remember how to go back that route that they have taken for 6 7 hours. So so that kind of shows how humans body and mind were kind of trained up to facilitate that process of hunting to bring home food. But so that's about the running, but that's also about the pain killing
Hmm.
element in the brain that allows
Hmm.
them to do that, but also about being able to remember how to get back. So it's about linking to place, linking to the
Yeah.
world around you.
Hmm.
So all these different kind of elements come together, and I think the running in this case is so important. So back to linking back to today, in terms of linking back to what we're doing in the classroom, we're so static often in classrooms
Yeah.
today, and the a lot of the premise of knowledge that we know of today is centered around the idea of knowledge as being something that is quite static. It doesn't change. Is
Hmm.
That's why
Hmm.
we put ideas into textbooks, we put ideas into books, and then we refer to them. And it's the idea that knowledge is a certain way, and I think we need to get out of that. And that's why the reference to running and hunting, and then the
Oh,
reference to,
yes.
for me, is so important. It's about knowledge beyond just books, beyond text, but also knowledge in other ways, knowledge that is through the body, knowledge that is that's about tactile,
Hmm.
rather. That's through the bodies, through touching, through looking at the world around you, through smelling, through it's a kind of a full body
Yeah.
experience.
Oh, I love it. And it makes it because when I started studying, I studied communication. They always talked about these different levels of listening and hearing, and there was this generative layer which I didn't couldn't really grasp at the time. But that's, I guess, what you're talking about here. Also in the embodiment area of working, where it evolves, it grows on the way, and that is so well captured in the, yeah, well, I would say your whole setup, the example, but also the setup of your research about run, 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 and then retrieving and finding this place. But that place could also move and shift and grow over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this kind of interconnectedness of different senses,
Yeah.
different experiences, and also interconnectedness of the body with the place
Yep.
around you, and then more important, and then as an extension of that, the society, the communities around you, and the world around you, and nature, and so on, the environment, and so on. This kind of
Hmm.
interconnectivity is something that a lot of us and a lot of the Western approaches to knowledge often disagree with,
Yeah.
because in a lot of how we go about doing things, you're supposed to be one thing. You're supposed to be a specialist in a certain way. You're boxed into certain
Yeah.
things. And if you're serious about something, you're not supposed to be so scattered. You're not
Yeah.
supposed to,
Fragmented.
that so many, yeah, you're not supposed to be
Yeah.
fragmented. You're supposed to be um, if you are say I don't know, if you are an archaeologist, you're only supposed to be an archaeologist. I'm just coming up with a random example, but you're not supposed to be also, I don't know, be a good chef,
Oh,
or you're not supposed to be someone
yes.
who's a very good marathon runner or something. So there is that kind of
Mm.
splitting that we do a
Mm.
lot in contemporary society. And I think that's why when I use running, and of course running isn't the only example, and I also talk about Lao Tzu's work, and of course Lao Tzu isn't the only example. Many of us who are acquainted with indigenous forms of
Yeah.
knowledge or non-Western forms of knowing the world, there would be plenty of other examples where you aren't splitting things
Yeah.
up, you aren't boxing things up, but you are very concerned about how things interconnect and interrelate. So it's a kind of a relational approach to the world, including the body as very much in the center of it, not as something that's shameful, not as
Oh,
something that
wow.
you say no, it's not
Mm.
important, but it's right in the
Hmm.
center of that
I
interconnectivity.
love it. And it really speaks to me on a deeper level because that's what I thought. I was a body worker, as in Pilates, dancing and working with the body. And then I was a teacher. I thought they didn't integrate at all. And look at us talking about embodied education, which is also that field where it brings it together and where I finally can breathe. But you touched upon something very strong, which is also the shame. And I thought because the world around me was thinking in these boxes, like Liz the Pilates teacher, or the body worker, and Liz
Mm,
the
yeah,
communication teacher. No, of course, that's weird. Why are you talking about body in the classroom? And I
yeah,
thought I was the
yeah.
odd one out. So, and that's what happened a lot.
That's part of that setup
Exactly.
to kind of say, yeah, you're not serious,
Exactly.
we can't take you
Exactly. And it's so
seriously.
strong. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, and I'm so glad that people like you are putting yourself out there and saying this is so
Yeah.
important for children, for higher education, at all different levels of education as we know
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is really important, and yeah, thank you for doing the work that you do.
Thank you. Well, and we're doing it together because we're creating it on the go and as we go flow.
That's
Yeah.
true.
So let's go back. I'm thinking like because we shared that you might have a practice also related to the running, right? To have a felt an experience for our listeners. I thought maybe to do that now, and then we can go to your book and your sidekick, the octopus, afterwards. So
Yes.
to just have a little like experience in the middle, and then we have a little bit more to wrap our heads around.
Sure, sure. Sounds good.
Cool,
Um, so what I think we could do as a little exercise, literally an
cool. Bring it
exercise,
on.
we can we can use our body by I don't know where the listeners are today or what they're doing currently, but my invitation is for us to kind of get out of the chair first of
Bring.
all, like get up,
Yep.
and also um, I might be limited in terms of walking a bit. Um, get up off the chair and then try to get out of the room that you're
Cool.
in, and try to or walk around in that room, actually, even walking around in the room. And now you can see my office, but just walking around in the room, and already you are experiencing the world in a different way. And if you try to pick up a little bit of speed, if you try to pick up a little bit of speed, and I know there would be a lot of barriers. If you're in your bedroom or if you're in a classroom, there will be barriers that you have to kind of go through,
Climb over.
try to negotiate. So it wouldn't be similar to Lao Tzu when he had to maybe walk across a river or try to get his donkey to help him to cross a mountain. But we have furniture instead, and I have a lot of computers and tables and so on. But when we're walking around, yes, Liz is walking very quickly. Yeah. And if there are other people around you, that's also really interesting. Then you can think of how you try to how your body relate to another body, or how your body mind relates to another body mind. and,
Yeah.
and how you kind of navigate that. How do you say, oh, excuse me, sorry, or do you say, oh, this is my path? So that could be really interesting. And then how do we then start to slow down and slow down to a pace that's comfortable for you, and then to return to our seat when we're ready. I was wondering what that
Yeah,
noise
you
was.
were probably hearing something but couldn't.
Yes. Now people have a good tour of my little office.
Yay.
Yeah. But so that was just a tiny kind of little exercise. It kind of breaks that sedentary setup that a lot of us have. And I speak a lot for myself. I My day job is as an academic, and it's very hard for me to sit still. Also, I
Yeah.
am neurodivergent. I'm hyperactive. I literally cannot stand. I don't like sitting still, but a lot of my work is about that.
If
So
you want to,
yeah.
feel free to stand and distance yourself a little bit if you feel the urge, because that's how you are. That's what you need. So just
Thank you.
pull the screen up, but
Yes,
go ahead. I love it actually, and I also am moving around always in my interviews because I get
I'm
you.
always moving around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that little exercise is useful, in that it just kind of breaks um that convention in a little
Hmm.
way, like your own convention, maybe, like, oh, I have to sit
Yeah.
still, and in order to focus. For me, I can focus more when I'm
Yeah.
moving. And also, I think what's really interesting is that movement and thinking. And I we were talking about it a little bit earlier as well, when we were talking about Lao Tzu's work, and also talking about Greek philosophers. But the word, we often think that thinking and moving are separate things, but the Greek philosophers and Lao Tzu have shown that it isn't. And also, the word discourse the word discourse is about discussions and looking into ideas, and analysis and so on. We often think of discourse in those ways, but what's so interesting is that the origin of the word discourse in Latin refers to running from place to place. So
Wow.
it's not just moving, but it's actually running from place to place. And the Chinese word for discourse, Dao, and it has part of the word for movement. So
Mm,
if you bring these two ideas together, then you make it clear that discourse isn't just about thinking and moving, but thinking and running. So that's quite an interesting kind of
yeah. Yeah.
framing, because it just completely um, disrupts a lot of what we may think of in terms of thinking. Oh, it's static. It's about something that doesn't move, and you have to sit down and so
Yeah,
on.
I love that framework, and that it can go together, and it's like both and instead of either or. which is so clear that we in that static place, we also tend to, in our thinking, get very linear, very straightforward and purpose driven, which is not bad, but there's there's a whole field and scope of place and people that you activated in the exercise, which I actually also love.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's not a binary thing,
No.
absolutely. And because I think it's dangerous when we kind of then we're doing that thing
Yeah.
that a lot of my work tries to disrupt, to say, oh, I don't like boxes, and then we're like saying, no, they're two
Yeah.
distinct things. But it's a
Yeah.
spectrum, I think. And we can customize, hopefully, a lot of my work is about sharing different ideas and just kind of disrupting what we take as the norm, and then just kind of hopefully in the process not saying no, this is the best thing, or no, you have to do this, but to actually say no, now we have more
Yeah.
choices, and now we can have this, we can customize things, we can customize things that work for
Yeah.
us, because the last thing I want to do is to be prescriptive and say no, you must do this, because that's exactly what I'm trying to
Okay.
say no to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this relates also so much to one of the questions I prepared. Uh, can I read this? I'd love to read it to you from
Yes.
your website, because you wrote about how it is about working with you. I think it was in one of your. I sent you an email, and then I got an auto reply which contained lots of information on how it is to work with you, or instructions, or links and tips. And then I was landing on your website, and I've read this, so I'll read it out loud. When work does not work in an ableist world that prioritizes normativity, including medical approaches to body minds, my differences are labeled ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and dyspraxia. Mainstream ways of work often creates long-term cognitive communication and psychosomatic, including sensory, challenges for me, which UK's Equality Act defines as disabilities requiring workplace adjustments. And under the Act, employers must make reasonable adjustments to make sure workers with disabilities or physical or mental health conditions are not substantially disadvantaged when doing their jobs. I love work and loving working with students, artists, scientists, non-humans. However, I refuse to and will walk away from work in a harmful and or equitable condition. First, I'd like you to thank you for pointing this out and, like, showcasing. It's sad that you have to put it out there to help the world how to other ways think and approach, but it's there's so much acknowledgement here for the fact that neurodiverse people are wired differently and are not helped by being labeled and feeling like they're in the box. um,
Yeah.
so it's not really fair, but might I ask you to illustrate what situations you have walked away from? Is that like to just unbox it a little further, because that was kind of in my mind a little bit.
Yeah, so many situations I've had to walk away
Mm,
from. But first of all, thank you for looking at that document. And I shared that document because I wanted it to be helpful for other people who are different, um, people who are pathologized as
yeah.
different, um, to help to advocate for
Yeah.
themselves. And and I am glad that I discovered, or I was told that I am clinically different quite late in my life. So I've had my whole life before
Yeah.
that, and then suddenly I'm given new labels of ADHD, autism, and
Yeah.
so on. And I'm like, okay, I'm not just going to take these labels. I need to ask questions. I need to make it. I need to find out who decides these things, and who decides these very unhelpful, often unhelpful
Yeah.
labels, and so for me, I wanted to kind of make it clear that there are different ways of knowing and understanding the world, and also knowing and understanding
Yeah.
difference. So not just the medical, and those are medical
Exactly.
labels. But having said that, we are also in a world which is, like I was saying in the document, it's an ableist world, and it does look at medical knowledge as the kind of top of the hierarchy of
Yeah.
knowledges, and then the embodied knowledge as somewhere outside, or very
not
low.
not in our
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
in the room.
Yeah, exactly. So I was in that document. I was trying to capture that kind of
Yeah.
tension, and to
Mm.
also therefore help people who are struggling at work, and um struggling at work, to kind of be able to articulate the needs, or to even know that they have the right
Yeah.
to ask for their needs to be accommodated. But having said all that, a lot of my work makes it clear that in the ideal world, I don't even have to ask for these things. In the ideal world, there are different modes of being, there are different modes of
Yeah.
working, and you don't have to explicitly make it clear that, oh, it's my
Mm-hmm.
problem, I'm the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of
Yeah.
tension. And in terms, back to your question, in terms of situations I have had to walk out from, there have been quite a lot of situations. And it's also because I'm quite old now. I'm like, yeah, I'm not when I was younger, I didn't, I maybe I didn't think that I could do that, or I didn't think that, or maybe I thought, oh, I need to have that
Yeah.
exposure, etc.
Yeah.
I need to stick with it. It's harmful, but I need to stick with it. But now I'm quite privileged. I have a day job, and I'm also of a certain like I'm old, so I kind of feel like if someone like me doesn't use her
Yeah.
privilege to speak out on things, and to make clear that, no, this is harmful, this is not good, and I need to make clear, and you need to make it clear in a public space that this is not good, etc., but also equally say what is good,
Yeah.
what works. So I feel that that's part of my role now, in terms of um, as an academic, as an educator, etc. So I've had to work out on things in I've had to work out in roles and jobs and projects where I feel they want someone like me as a token. They 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 might, and especially since Black Lives Matter, there's been a lot of um
And might I ask,
say
like very bluntly, just to be specific, somebody like me, as in somebody who's neurodivergent, or somebody that has Asian roots?
somebody, yeah, as well. So yeah, absolutely, all of
Mm.
it. So I'm often, yeah, it's the
Yeah.
intersectional prism is useful here. So yes, I'm neurodivergent. I'm also not a white person, not of the dominant
Yeah.
race. I'm in a European
Yeah.
country. Of course, I've come from an Asian country where I'm of a dominant race.
And then
But
all of a sudden
um,
you're like the DIY person having to carry that load for everyone because of that.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and also because I know that I am like a, what's the word? I'm like a model kind of,
Role model?
yeah, in I'm a safe person for them, because
Mm.
I because of
Mm.
the sort of work that, because of I'm part of a university, for example, as opposed to someone who is perhaps um someone who is more different, who isn't, whom they don't feel safe to be working with. So I'm often I'm often assigned as someone who's different enough, but different enough to make an organization look good, but not different enough to make things um,
Mm.
make really challenge them. But that's the thing. I make use of that. I make use of that, but also I make use of that, and then I enter these spaces, and I talk about this in a much more nuanced way in my book as well. Like this, walking the line of being seen as someone who's a safe enough
Mm.
person that's different. And then when I do go into these spaces, I do try to help to make those kind of changes.
May
um
I ask, what
and
does that ask of you? What is that load that in that role of leading in such a spaces? What does that
yeah,
require of you, and on an embodied level?
yeah, on an embodied level, it makes you feel sick.
Yeah,
It can, yeah, and this is talked extensively in the work of Black activists and Black research, Black Black pedagogy, for
mm,
example. And there's a lot of work by a lot of very radical teachers, movers, leaders, shakers out there who talk about how this kind of like being part of systems that are harmful, what it does to you, not just mentally but physically. And
exactly.
it the one of the words that's used is it wears you down. It's weathering. It makes it just takes a little bit off you day by day. And there are different terms out there, and another term that is used by researchers, including one someone called Jason Arday, Arday, Professor Jason Arday, and amongst other um, Black thinkers, researchers. They talk about the double pandemic since
Mhm.
COVID. So it isn't just COVID that is the pandemic, but specifically anti-Black racism that's coming out from that COVID really reveals, because Black people are disproportionately affected by a global pandemic, and so a lot of those thinking is has been really influential for a lot of people, not just Black researchers, not just Black practitioners, but also a lot of other people from different minoritized groups who find those thinking really, really useful. And that's but that's not to say that the experiences are directly
Mm.
comparable. And that's also why I keep saying that I'm very privileged in many ways, and I'm often seen to be, she's safe. She isn't that radical.
Mhm.
She's the more
Yeah.
palatable. She's the more she's the palatable version of difference. And but a lot of my work actually disrupts that. So a lot of my work makes use of the fact that that I'm seen as this kind of model, um, model migrant is the term I use in one of my social media descriptors. Um, but that allows me to get into spaces that other minoritized groups don't get into. And when I'm in these spaces, I try to help to do the kind of work that is needed to
Yeah.
do. I'm not saying that I'm the only one doing that kind of work. I'm saying that it is a very slow, long, generational
And I think
process
you need
that
to
would
have
have to.
a build up level of leadership, like you talk about also in your book, to
Absolutely.
be able to
Yeah.
carry that, because the sickness comes, right? You have to deal.
Yeah.
No, it's
And
enough.
yeah, the sickness is something that activists talk
Yeah,
about as well.
yeah,
People doing that kind of
yeah.
frontline work where you try to be, you try to help to make change, and that you have to. I think we often learn that, oh, you can't do everything, and then you have to, and that awareness is quite important. That awareness that, okay, it is something that you it's a load that, yes, you want to, you're those of us who feel able to, we want to step forward and try to help to do that work. But we also have to acknowledge that no, it's not overnight, and yes, you're part of that tradition. There are
Mm.
people who have tried to do this, and you acknowledge that. And also, and that's why being a teacher is helpful, you acknowledge how you you can't help to do all of this well, you can't overturn all of this, and you need to share this burden or share this gift as well with the next generation of
Right.
people, and the next generation of people can ask better questions. They can help to crack other areas that others that myself and others haven't been
Yeah.
able to crack. So
Yeah.
it is this, again, this kind of interconnected kind of view of the world, view of not acknowledgement of not just the limitations of your own body and your own body
Mhm.
mind, but also um, being able to understand the scale of the project and understand that, look, these are connected, and there are other body minds in the world that can help to continue this work.
If we speak directly to those embodied educators, what can you, maybe, I don't know, maybe from your tentacular, because we need to talk about your sidekick in shortly as well. Is there anything that you could advise them or tell them, like three things to do, or even one thing that they can address straight away in their classrooms, so they can take this journey slowly, bit by bit, one nervous system at a time? But how can you help them make that start, maybe? Because I think a lot of people, I know from being in lots of teacher rooms, a lot of colleagues are scared. They don't know how to address this, and they have their own system feeling the sickness and being afraid of going
Yeah,
against. So, what's
yeah,
a way in?
yeah. That's a good question. Um,
Do you talk about that maybe
I
in your
think,
book? Because I also read something like, start with the biases or the prejudice and what you hold, or.
yeah, I think, yeah, I talk about this in my book. One of the things I talked about was to not feel like you're alone,
Mm,
and try to find other body minds who are also boxed in these kind of spaces, be it the classroom, be it the educational
yeah,
system, be it the kind of neo-capitalist system,
yeah.
etc., to find others who might share some of these ideas, and then to make those connections, to join up.
Hmm.
So I'm, and I talk about this I talked about this in the conference where we met as well. I talked about this in terms of this need to kind of extend your
Hmm.
tentacles and help for others around you, and not feel like, no, this is my burden. Yes, this is all our burden. And um to be able to acknowledge your limitations, but also to join up with others, to realize that, yes, we need, this has to be collaborative, co-creative. This has to be also about allyship. So it isn't just the burden of a small group of, or small groups of
No,
people, be it in terms of racial lines or in terms of
marginalized.
disability,
Yeah.
etc. But it has to be a joined up
Yeah.
effort. And again, it's that connectivity and interconnectivity. So
Mm.
allyship is important. So it isn't the problem, and in fact it's never, it's often it's just never the, when you talk about racism and people say, oh, why is someone who's a race of who's racially diverse having to do the work of anti-racism, when it's literally not our problem. It's racism is a problem that others have.
Created
Yes,
upon
it's
you.
literally not my problem.
Yeah.
So that's why I talk about allyship, and the need to kind
Mm.
of join up.
Mm. Wonderful. So powerful. Yeah. And I just wanted to address that because from my own experience, being I was in a very strong, heavily led course on embodied equity as educators and helping professionals. And the first thing they set up was these specific rooms, and also a BIPOC room, a BIPOC, where everybody is in a specific room where you feel like you're amongst allies. And that was specifically the reason. In education, we never think about that a classroom, so if you're in the privileged group, you feel probably comfortable in the classroom. But if you're in the, like, the other, the other
Mhm.
groups, you feel like an
Mm.
outsider already from the starting point. So looking at education from this setting of how can you help them find allies and feel safe and safer, so they can learn, and it can be as much their learning space as the privileged ones, because sometimes when they come in, they're already way behind in being
Absolutely.
on.
And that's why education is, and embodied education is such a
Yeah,
powerful and useful
yeah.
framing, because And for me, education is not just about learning, it's also about unlearning and also
Yeah.
relearning. And the learning isn't just teacher to student. It's not just a binary kind of setup. It's
Mm.
multi-directional. There's a lot of learning, and I talk about this in my book and elsewhere a lot. I learned so much from the younger generation,
Mm.
and I put my hands up immediately to say a lot of the problems of the world are created by my generation, and also and also people above my generation. But that's also why I must
Yeah.
help to, undo that. And a lot of the younger generation, they inspire me so much in so many times of despair. Earlier we talked about walking out. Like I often want to walk out of so many situations, and then I feel, no, um I need to hang on tight. I need to um, be there. The younger people are reminding me what's important. The younger people are reminding me to be hopeful, etc. So yeah, so I often think about, yeah, the Gen Z. I don't like the
Mm.
term, um, but a lot of the younger people are really showing that, a lot of our that we can change, that we can
Yeah.
learn, in terms
Yeah.
of, even just in terms of, say, for example, like, how we think about gender, for example. The younger generation are so fluid in how they, think, how they talk about the gender pronouns, preferred gender pronouns, and
Mm.
how they are very agile. They don't box
Mhm.
themselves. So, and that isn't just in terms of in terms of thinking about gender, but also in terms of how they do gender, how they perform it in their everyday
Yeah.
life. And I think, wow, that's something that even like one generation or two generations on, like, there's such a
Yeah.
difference. And that's the sort of thing that I feel very inspired
Oh,
by.
wow. Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah. And I think we also shared a similar experience at the conference where we were, where we met, of feeling quite like we couldn't leave, but we had to address a level of unawareness of intention and
Yeah,
impact. Maybe their intention wasn't to de other, but the impact strongly was, and how
yeah.
present it is in our academical world still.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up. Maybe I can just provide a little bit of context, and and you can help to chip in with the details,
Mm.
I guess, because that's like, so the conference. It's now a few months ago.
It was
Yeah,
in
May,
May,
and
yeah.
yeah, in Copenhagen, was about embodied education, and I think so many of us went there with this hope. Oh wow, this is going to
This
be
is going to be my
different. This
tribe,
is
I thought. That's what I thought.
my
My
people,
people.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, and
Yes.
that we're going to do things differently to other kinds of
Yeah.
conferences. We're going to really put the body in the
Yeah.
center, and also the body, not just in terms of the white male, cis heterosexual male with who's not disabled, but all kinds of
Yeah.
bodies. And little did we know that when we entered that space, it was actually when many of us were giving feedback and saying how this is actually one of the least embodied conference. Like, this is the most kind of static and conferences that we've been to, where we're just sitting there and yeah, so it was actually really interesting. And but I also think it was very symptomatic of higher education in general. It does reveal the kind of hidden and actually not so hidden hierarchies
No.
of power
Yeah.
structures. So, in terms of the keynote speeches, we were getting the kind of usual kind of certain schools, Berlin School of Thinking, or certain schools of thinking about the world, thinking about
Yeah.
knowledge, and certain ways of doing knowledge, and then which were very, very which threw up a lot of questions, and people from the floor were asking, oh, what about disabled people in this situation? There's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of ingenuity. Why aren't we talking about that? And then the response coming from the kind of keynote was like, oh yeah, that's good, but um like lucky them kind of thing. Like it was a very throwaway, patronizing, ableist kind of response, which was very shocking for this kind of the first kind of international conference on embodied
Yeah.
education.
It
And
was
many of us were very unhappy
yeah.
with that, weren't we?
Very. And well, yeah, and also trying to address, which was the hardest point, because I think there was so much unawareness of the impact the way they set it up. Because I don't think the intention, that's often the problem, the intention wasn't bad at all, but the context around it was just so not up to date on many embodied levels that were present in the room, that there was such a gap between intention and impact. And then but we were having discussions on, totally different floors over there, which I think is where, that's specifically where it took me 2 or 3 months to address, like, the undercurrent of this event, because we were not we were disembodied over there, and that's how education became this static. So first, I think it starts with the embodiment to feel and start getting there, and that's why I love us having this talk and speaking up and addressing this in a kind and loving way. Like, it could be done differently,
Mm.
and we're here to talk and share our insights because we have them,
Yeah.
and please make use of that, and give as much, you know
No, absolutely. And I'm so glad we are talking. Absolutely. And this is one of the ways to resist
yeah,
that kind of lack of self-awareness. And then this is one of the ways to talk back, to speak back to that kind of spaces, those kind of spaces that, yes, not intentionally harmful, but absolutely being perpetuating the kind of harmful behaviors and structures all around
yeah,
us. And I'm glad that you are able to open up and hold this space for us to think a little bit more
yeah.
about that, and think about ways to resist that and to talk back to
Mm,
that, because that unfortunately is the
yeah,
dominant approach.
yeah,
And many of us are familiar to that, like that kind of being talked at, and like that's the only way of knowing the world. Like one with I can't one of the examples that was shared was about a certain schoolgirl holding her pen in the wrong hand, and doing things incorrectly. And I can't remember what the name of the person was. It Beth or some Vicky, I don't know. But then they had kind of a hypothetical example of a little girl, and of course they choose a little girl who's so mischievous and misbehaving. And then my question was, but surely if you're a good educator, you're able to work with the little girl rather than to pathologize her difference from the off, and saying, oh, you shouldn't hold your pen in the left hand, or you shouldn't be, you shouldn't be doing things in a certain way. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work that remains to be done. And like opening up spaces like this is one way to speak
yeah,
back, and hopefully we can keep doing that. And it was good also that we spoke up during the conference. It's so important to call out
yeah.
during, even if it falls on deaf ears, even and it was extraordinary when the response came back. It was like, wow, there's
That
just
was.
this zero.
I also noticed I went backwards, like, okay, I'm here, but I
Yeah,
am out.
yes.
Actually, my nervous system was quite down, and like, oof, I can't hold this on my own any longer. That's what I noticed in my
Well,
body.
yeah, but also um the other thing that was extraordinary happening during those moments where we all were physically like doing, our bodies were retracting and saying, no, I don't want this, I need to protect myself, I don't like this, I can feel harm all around me. But what was happening was the group of us, myself, you, and a few other people, participants who went to the conference, we teamed up in a way, we joined up, and we say, oh
We
no, we need
found our
to we need
allies.
yeah, we found, and that was so
Yeah,
powerful, and that was so important. Even though we might not have succeeded in terms of changing them there and then, it was so powerful for us to say, look, we
yeah,
acknowledge this, we know that this isn't right, and we know that we need to join up there and then,
Yeah.
to an extent organize ourselves, and then to call out on them, call out on what was absolutely wrong there and then. And then now for us to pick up some of those conversations now, and hopefully share it with a larger audience out
Exactly.
there, to keep thinking about ways to kind of resist that. I think that
Yeah.
that's the power,
It makes me think of my
that's
teacher, Dr. Nikki Elliott, who was leading the embodied equity, polyvagal informed, trauma informed lens of educating and helping professionals work. It's a two-train track where we, on one hand, grow our capacity, like you write in your book, using yourself as an example and staging yourself to open up the worlds which you enter. My podcast, where I do it, our
yeah,
individual growing capacity to hold the discourse, and at the same
yeah,
time addressing the bigger system. So it's the individual line where we each time grow and then we nourish, and then the other one, which we're doing now, is because we're nourished
mm,
enough to address the system. And it's not the personal, it's the system that we're calling out and showing it can be done
absolutely.
in different ways. And that's also the justice, the activism that we're having here, right? In the embodied spaces where we're not de-othering and really finding a more inclusive level on within our bodies. Because yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, the term growing capacity is a good one. Yeah, it's that making
yeah,
connections, allyship, and trying to find
yeah,
solidarity, and trying to help to change things
yeah.
together. Yeah,
Love it.
absolutely.
So I feel like I need to ask this question because it's you. It's how I remember you. Your sidekick. Well, it's not a sidekick at all, I guess, but Octopussy, like your tentacular pedagogy. Could you just, from an embodied perspective, get people like get them a little bit into what that means and stands for, because I feel like that would be a stage to show it and to also close our conversation for today.
Sure. So the Octopussy is not a very original name at all, but it's a combination of the octopus and the pussycat. So the octopus, as we know, has got 8 limbs, 8 arms. But what's so interesting is that each arm has its own
Yeah,
mind. So plus its own kind of headquarters, plus 8 arms, there's actually nine. There's actually 9 minds that the octopus has. So it's like a monster. And 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 we would be familiar with how octopuses are like jelly. The bodies are sticky. They can shape shift. They can shift their shapes, and that's what I really like about the octopus. It's like a monster, but it can change its shape. It listens to the world around it, and then it change. It's very
yeah.
responsive, but it can also hide when it needs to
Mm,
hide. So it can also camouflage itself. So it's very much part of the world. It's embedded, but the body is this kind of very intelligent body, and it it collapses the issue of the mind and body immediately already, because the arms are also mind. So it's
mm,
just this amazing kind of this almost mythical creature, and it's been around for only 296 million years. So it knows a little bit about surviving the world, and also even thriving.
yes.
Like it's the species is not extinct, it's still thriving. So, and then the pussy part of it is the
Mm,
pussycat. So it's I'm a child free crazy cat woman, cat lady. And this is for people in the States who are having to vote, who are thinking of who they want to vote for. You would be familiar with my reference, but yeah, there's been talk about childless cat women. So I'm one of them. And I love cats. Cats are amazing. And cats, they roam the world. They're wandering around the world, a little bit like Lao Tzu, whom I referred to at the beginning of the podcast. They are not just staying in one place, and they're a little bit different to dogs in that they kind of have things in their own terms. They can be social, they can also be antisocial. So they're very aware of the world.
Mm.
So that's what I do like about cats. And also they're very cute. No other reason. Oh, that's my very intellectual reason.
Some
So,
cuteness
so
in this world.
altogether, that's the
And how do
octopussy,
you bring
but
it into
also
the
that.
classroom? How does it relate to pedagogy? Because I'm already like going out of my mind, with all the tentacles being very tentacular.
Yeah. So it, yeah, and in terms of specifically how the octopussy relates to the classroom, I came up with a kind of a model of 9 dimensions, which I call tentacular pedagogy. So 9 dimensions and 3 hearts, because an octopus has 3 hearts, which I forgot to mention. So the idea is that the 3 hearts would be around intersectionality.
Decolonization and neurodiversity. Kai's tentacular pedagogy builds or draws on the octopus's extraordinary composition of those 3 hearts and 9 minds. Unfortunately, here I am without Kai because we lost our 9 minutes of our wonderful, rich conversation. So I'm only here to tell you, go to the show notes if you'd like to know more, read up on the 9 tentacles of the octopus connected to the 3 hearts, which will all bring you deep into the interesting part of tentacular pedagogy. And if you'd like to, you can also go to Kai's website, which is kaisingtan.com/artful. I'll put it in the show notes. And you can also follow her or contact her through LinkedIn, Instagram, if there's anything sticky icky with you that you'd love to explore through all her interesting views and programs she's bringing into the world. And of course, you can read a book, which is also going to be shown here in the video. So this is it for now. I thank you so deeply for listening and tuning in with us. And Kai, a deep bow to you with all the hard work you have to put up and the courage it takes to bring embodied justice work into the world. It's beautiful. Thank you for your courage and your compassion. Take care.